How's everybody doing today? Shalom Aleichem. We'll continue our study of Menachos, and we're on the left column of page Zion, and it's the second paragraph, Benidov. So until now, we've been focusing on various kinds of Menachos that are Chova, whether they're Chovas Yachid or Chovas Tzibur. Now we're going over to Nidov. And he says that in a mincha, we have various parts of the mincha, various ingredients that go into making a mincha. For example, we have soles, and we have shemen, and we have yain. And the question is, can a person carve out his own vision of a mincha as in a dove? And we're going to start with quoting the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Yochel Adam Lisnade Minchas Nisochim Bifnei Atzma. Let's say, for example, a mincha that has in it the additional elements of shemen and yayin is usually a mincha that accompanies a zevach. And we said that, for example, a korban shlomim or a korban ola requires the accompaniment of a minchas nisachim. This man comes along, he says, I'm not going to bring a korban ola, I'm not volunteering to bring a korban shlomim, I just want to volunteer to bring minchas nisachim. And we're assuming that now, even though within the framework, the constellation of menachos, there is no such entity as a minchas nisachim that comes bifnei atzmo on its own without accompanying a zevach. Nevertheless, if he took it upon himself to obligate himself in a minchas nisachim, he can create that entity. Echad mishloshes mine minchas zu, dahainu kiminchas keves or kiminchas ayal or kiminchas apar. Let's just very, very quickly review what we learned on, I think it was on Sunday, maybe, perhaps. Oh, well, no, Sunday we weren't able to get together, so it would be on Thursday for us. But anyway, in the previous discussion that we had, we said that in the case of a keves, the keves is accompanied by an isaron of soles, as well as a revius hin shemen and revius hin yayin. In the case of an ayal, it's shnei esron, we double it, and it's going to be shlishis hahin shemen and shlish hahin yayin. And finally, in the case of a par, it's going to be shlosh esronim solas with a chatzi hahin yayin and a chatzi hahin shemen. And those shiurim remain the same with regard to an adova bifnei atzmo, b'minchas nisachim bifnei atzmo. He can take upon himself a minchas nisachim of a keves, a minchas nisachim an ayil, or a minchas nisachim of par. Now we want to go one step further, and that is with regard to the yayin element. Is there such a thing as an adova of bringing just the yayin? So now we don't have a zevach, we don't have a minchas nisachim of soles. All we have is a nedava of a minchas yayin. Says Rabbi Akiva, even here he has carte blanche, and he can create a mincha, a nedava obviously, of yayin b'fnei atzma. What about shemen? Shemen, says Rabbi Akiva, that's already crossing all the boundaries. Why? Because shemen is part of the blila, and it's added to the mixture with the solas. He's not bringing a minchas solas. He wants to just bring shemen. There ain't no such thing. There is such a thing as a minchas nisachim of yayin. That does exist within the constellation of Kodshim, but there is no such thing as a shemen that's brought on its own. Shemen is added to a mincha. He wants to bring the shemen and obligate himself to do so without a solace, without a mincha. But Rabbi Tarfon disagrees. And Rabbi Tarfon goes as far as to say and this is recorded in the Mishnah in Menachos Adaf Kuf Daled Amud Beis, that misnadvim shemen b'fnei atzma. You can actually volunteer to bring a nedava of shemen, just simply shemen. Now, what is going to go on the mizbeach in the case of shemen? Again, we're not adding it to a mincha because he's not bringing a mincha. He's not bringing the solus. So what we do is we divide the shemen into two parts, according to Rabbi Tarfon. Part of it is called a kometz. There's a volume of shemen that he can fit into 3 fingers if he closed it on his fist. And that's going to be brought on the mizbeach. And the balance of the shemen is nechal l'kohen. Wow. So this is the shita of Rabbi Tarfon. Okay. Now, what happens if a person simply volunteers, he makes a pledge of minchas nesachim? Now, we know that minchas nesachim includes shemen with the solus. But what about yayin? We said that both according to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, they agree unanimously that you can be misnadev yayin as a separate nedava. We'll see exactly what he does with the yayin. But in the case of a person who took upon himself a nedava of minchas nesachim, do we assume that he includes within the minchas nesachim the yayin? Yayin, to some extent, is a separate element. And the proof is that you can bring a nedavas yayin bifnei atzma, both according to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. So what we begin with now is the shita of the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Ma'aser Karbonos Perek Yud Daled says that yayin eino b'chlal mincha. That yayin, according to the Rambam, is not included in the mincha. Why? Because yayin is a separate element. He was only minadev to bring a minchas nesachim. He didn't explicitly include yayin, and yayin is a separate, independent element. However, Rashi, and before Rashi, Rabbeinu Gershom, assume that yayin nichlal b'mincha zu, that if he takes a stam, an adava stam of minchas nesachim, he has in mind the full gamut, all the ingredients of a minchas nesachim, including not only the solus and the shemen, but also the yayin. Whereas the Rambam is not like that. The Rambam holds that the yayin is separate, independent, and if he takes an adava minchas nesachim, he does not include an obligation, a commitment to bring yayin. Okay, now at this point, he quotes a sfas emes. Yeshe kosa shayayin eino b'chlal mincha, and that really reflects the shita of Rashi and Rabbeinu Gershon. I'm sorry, just one second. Let me get the shita of the Rambam. Right. Oh, the Rambam shita. I'm sorry, that yayin is not included in the mincha. Says this sfas emes. Ha'im nechleku Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon gam b'solus l'lot shemen, o shel divrei hakol efshel l'snadev solus below shemen, o shel divrei hakol ein ha'solus ba below shemen. If we're saying that yayin is a separate entity, could we possibly postulate that solus is a separate entity? So let's say, for example, if a person takes an adava to bring solus as a mincha, what about shemen? So the Sfas Emes wants to suggest that the status of Shemen would depend upon this machlokus between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. Because Rabbi Akiva says that you have an nedava of yayin b'fnei atzmo, but there's no nedava of shemen b'fnei atzmo. Rabbi Tarfon says even in the case of shemen, you could have a nedava of shemen b'fnei atzmo. So just like we're saying, according to the Shittas of Rambam, that in the case of yayin, when he takes a nedava to bring a minchas nesachim, yayin is not included because yayin is independent. And that's true Bein Rabbi Akiva and Bein Rabbi Tarfon. What's the status of Shemen? Is Shemen independent? Is there such an entity as a Nidov of Shemen? And we said that that's a machlokus between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. So let's take, for example, Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon's shita is that there's such an entity as a Nidov of Shemen. It means that Shemen is an independent element in the equation. Therefore, says the Sfas Emes, according to Rabbi Tarfon, if he took an Nedava to bring a mincha of solas, then he doesn't have to bring shemen with the solas. Why? Because Rabbi Tarfon holds that solas and shemen are two independent entities. Haraya, if he takes a Nedava to bring shemen, he will bring shemen. But according to Rabbi Akiva, that shemen is never an independent entity. It's always part of the solas as one hefza of minchas nesachim. Then if he takes a pledge to bring a minchas nesachim, then we have to assume, according to Rabbi Akiva, that for sure shemen is part of his nedava. Rabbi Akiva holds that shemen is never an independent entity. Oh, Dilma, here's the second side in the Sfas Emes. He vacillates and he says, everybody would agree, even Rabbi Akiva, that you can have an Nedava of solas without shemen. Even though Rabbi Akiva holds that there's no such thing as shemen unto itself, shemen is always a tag along to the solas, but nevertheless, says the Sfas Emes, Rabbi Akiva would agree that you can commit yourself to a pledge of solas without shemen. And why is that so? Oh, shel divrei hakol ain't solas bar below shemen. That even Rabbi Tarfon, who has and recognizes the entity of shemen as an independent entity, would agree that solas is not independent of shemen. Shemen is independent of solas. But what's solas without shemen? The whole essence of blila is the mitzvah of adding the shemen and mixing it together with the solas. So that now the Sfas Emes is saying that everybody would agree that there's no such entity as an nedava of a solas without shemen. Shemen is what has to be added and mixed together with the solas. But again, there's no machlokas that you can bring yayin b'fnei atzmo. Everybody agrees to that. And then I asked you the question before, how do you bring the yayin to Fnei? Exactly where do you pour the yayin? Okay, we'll get to that later. But I just want to backtrack and focus on one point of the Sfas Emes, where he says, L'divrei hakol, efshal is nadev soles lilo shemen. You can have a mincha, which was taken upon himself as a pledge, minus shemen. And when he says everybody, L'divrei hakol, he's including in L'divrei hakol the sheet of Rabbi Tarfon, who has shemen as an independent entity. I'm sorry, no, that's poch. So again, according to Rabbi Tarfon, shemen is bo b'fnei atzmo. Then in the case of soles, you could have soles without shemen. I'm sorry. According to Rabbi Akiva, I meant to say, I lost the cheshbon. According to Rabbi Akiva, who says that you cannot have shemen without soles, how is it possible? So that's what I'm asking on these Sfas Emes, that you could have soles without shemen. If you can't have shemen without soles, then presumably the flip side would be that you can't have soles without shemen. Rabbi Akiva denies the independence of Shemin as a separate entity. And even if a person would say, I'm misnadev to bring Shemin, there is no such entity. It doesn't exist. Shemin is always an adjunct and a tag on to Solas. How can you have souls without Shemin? So let's read it again. L'divrei hakol, efshel isnadev soles lelo Shemin. So it means it's a one-way street. I think we've encountered things like this before. Like when we're discussing Levona without Lechem Aponim, that maybe you could have Levona without Lechem Aponim, but not the other way around. It's a one-way street. He's saying that according to Rabbi Akiva, Shemin could not exist as a separate entity. In the constellation of Menachos, Shemin is always an adjunct to the Solus. But Solus itself, although in 99 out of 100 cases is mixed with the Shemin is mixed in the Solus, but there is such an entity as the Solus unto itself, as a Korban Mincha. Solus then, according to Sfas Emes, is such a critical element in Menachos, it basically virtually defines the essence of Mincha. And therefore you could bring a Mincha b'nidava that's made up of purely Solus. Now in the case of Yayin, we said everybody agrees, both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, that you could bring an nidava of Yayin b'fnei atzmo. So where do you pour this Yayin? L'das Rabbi Akiva, misnasech l'shitin kishar nisachim. Anytime that we bring niskei Yayin, we pour it onto the shitin, and that goes down from the corner of the Mizbech a hole that takes it underneath. Shmuel understood that Yayin Bifnei Atzmo means exactly what it says. Take it literally. There's such a thing as a Nidava of Yayin Bifnei Atzmo. This is not like Niskei Yayin. Niskei Yayin means that we pour the Yayin in the Shita. But here he's coming and he's taking upon himself a pledge of Yayin. Means I want to bring Yayin on the Mizbeach. Well, if there's a Torah of Yayin on the Mizbeach, because Halacha recognizes a Nadav of Yayin, then you have to pour it onto the Eish of the Mizbeach. Now here we have a serious problem. Because if you open up to Vayikra Perek Vav, the Torah says Tamid, that the Eish of the Mizbeach has to be continuous. There's no moment of time when there's no Eish on the Mizbeach. And then the Torah says, Lo Yichre. We are enjoined from extinguishing the fire on the Mizbeach. Well, one thing I can promise, if you pour Yayin onto the Eish, it's going to extinguish the Eish. That's a lav d'oraisa of lo yicham. You have one of two answers. Either you apply the principle of dover she'eino miskaven. His kavan is not to extinguish the fire; he just wants to burn up the yayin. But insofar as yayin is a liquid going onto fire, it's going to cause an extinguishing. He's she'eino miskaven, so it's an isur which without kavan. And then you get to the question of psik reisha, that even Rav Shimon, who holds dover she'eino miskaven, is mutter, but moder Rav Shimon is psik reisha. So if we know for sure that the yayin is going to extinguish the fire, then dover she'eino miskaven is not going to help you. But I think there's another answer to this question. That's called kibui b'mixas lav shmei kibui. He's not actually extinguishing the fire on the mizbeach, because he's going to pour the yayin slowly, right? B'tipin tipin. And even though there'll be a partial extinguishing of the H, but it's never a total extinguishing of the H. When the Torah says lo yichbe, it means be makayim the mitzvah of tamid, that the H is always burning on the mizbeach. So therefore, the Isur Kibui, which is one of the Taryag mitzvahs, only applies if you machaber the Eish legaber. and there's no Eish on the Mizbeach. But if by pouring this yayin as a libation on part of the Eish, then you're going to get a kibbud b'mitzvahs, and only a segment of the Eish is burned, but there's still an Eish burning, that's not a violation of the law. That's Shita Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, as we said it earlier, he takes this nedava and he places it back into the general context of niskei, which means halashita. Now we know that the avoda of shchita in a zerach and all the other avodas of the dam has to take place by day and not by night. What about Nesachim? Does Nesachim have the same status as a Zevach, and it must be therefore brought on the Mizbeach during the daylight hours, or no? It says Nesachim kravim afilu b'layla. And this is derived from a pasuk, uminchasam v'niskehem. And what's the extra word, v'niskehem? Afilu b'layla. Afilu b'layla. I sense intuitively that we should be adding something here, but I'm not sure exactly how to formulate. Afilu b'layla. They were really separating the Nesachim from the Zevach. And the Zevach is b'yom, and the Nesachim is b'layla. Afilu b'layla. I mean, it doesn't have to be b'layla. Now, this din appears in the Gemara in Tmura on Daf Yud Dal. The Gemara then quotes a machlokes between Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yosef. The Das Rabbi Yosef had Mamur b'chol Nesachim. Every one of the various categories of Nesachim can be brought at night. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi has a different opinion. Rak Nesachim aboim b'fnei atzmon kravim afilu b'layla. Aval kshehem boim yachad im hazevach einam kravim ela b'yom. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, we have to curtail this halacha of Nesachim b'layla. And if the Nesachim in the classic scenario are coming as an accompaniment to a Zevach, then just like the Zevach is beyond, then you cannot be makriv the Nesachim unless it's Yom. However, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi agrees that if you have a case of Nesachim aboim bifnei atzmon, as we discussed earlier, that a person is misnadev, takes upon himself a voluntary pledge to bring Nesachim, then in such a case, says Rav Yosef, if it's ba b'fnei atzmo, then it's afilu b'layla. So basically, what Rav Yeshua ben Levi and Rav Yosef are arguing, they're debating, is what happens in a case where a person accepts upon himself a pledge voluntarily to bring the Nesachim. And we now assume that Nesachim as a ba b'fnei atzmo could be brought b'layla. That's for sure. Nobody debates that. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would say that if the Nesachim are not this voluntary Nesachim, but he volunteered to bring his Nesachim together with his Korban Olah, Korban Shlamim, then it has to be brought during the day, that the Nesachim have the same identical status as the Zevach. The Zevach is dafka by day, so too the Nesachim is dafka by day. So in a sense, I would say that Rabbi Yosef is really a radical sheet over here. You're talking about the sachem that are brought together with the zevach, and yet the zevach will be brought during the day, and the sachem at night, or they could be brought at night. I mean, you understand, according to Rav Yosef, why the Gemara, the Mishnah, needs a pasuk for this, a derivation, to tell you that nesachim, that a boim bifnei, that a boim yachanim azevach can be brought during the night. Did I say Rav Yosef? I meant to say Rav Yosef. I hope I said it. Anyway, now at this point, to conclude this discussion, he quotes a Shita Mekubetzes and a Chazon Ish. Yesha Kosav, Shedafka Nisachim Aboyim Machmas HaZeva Krevim Afil B'Layla. This is counterintuitive, but Dafka because the Nisachim are coming to accompany a Zeva, that's why you can be makriv with the Nisachim even B'Layla. She'enam Krevim Yachad Imo B'Osa Yom. So this Shita Mekubetzes is adding another element in the equation, another variable. He's saying that we said, I don't remember when we did this, maybe a week ago, when we started Nesachim, that the Nesachim don't have to be brought simultaneous with the Zevach. Even though it's accompanying the Zevach, you can count even days down the line. He says the following, that is there such a thing as Nesachim Aboyim Zevach B'Layla, which we said according to Rav Yosef in fact exists. He says it depends. You have to really subdivide into two categories. There's a case of Nesachim Haboim Zevach, and then there's a case of bringing the Zevach on one day and the Nesachim days later. In the case of Nesachim Haboim Machmas HaZevach, Kishe'enam Krevim Yachad Imo Bosayom, he brings the Zevach on a Tuesday, and he brings the Nesachim that accompany that Zevach on a Wednesday. Then we can activate the principle of Laila. In a case where he brings the Korban and the Mincha together with the Korban, on the same day, then there's no halach of Laila. Niskei nedava shebaim lo Korban klal enim krevim el bayom. Really interesting. According to the Chazon Ish, and he based himself on the Shita, it's only when we can effectuate this breakage, I call it, and break up the connection between the Nesachim and the Zevach, then Laila becomes an option. But if you isolate Nesachim per se require Yom just like any other Korban. There's a new din that if you have the Zevach on one day, and tomorrow or the day after you bring the Nesachim, then we break the connection between the Nesachim, and we're going to allow for the Nesachim Afilu B'Layla. So let's say, for example, here's the nafkamina. If a person takes upon himself an Nedava to bring Niskei, to bring a Minchas Nesachim, he can't bring it Laila. He's got to bring it by day. And the reason for that is because it doesn't form a new entity. It's like an image of a Boim HaZevach. And if we're imagining as if it was Boim HaZevach, then it requires Yom. unless you have a case where the nesachim are brought on a different day. All right, so let's just make a note of where we got to. From now on, we're going to be discussing Ua and Peros. In other words, what is Roy for a mincha and for Nesachim? What kind of behemos and what kind of chitim, zaysim, and different kinds of fruits and so forth and so on. So that's going to be tomorrow.